Good morning. Whether you are attending this event live or via recording, on behalf of the Public Relations Society of America Counselors to Higher Education section, I want to welcome you to this Google Hangout on Air with Executive Level Communicators, Part 2. Today's event will focus on institutions that are going global with the university brands. My name is Dana Fair. I'm a senior communicator at the University of Michigan. I'm a member of the Counselors to Higher Education, or as we like to say, CHI, Executive Committee, and I'll be your host. Before we begin, if you're not already a member of CHI, I'd like to invite you to join. CHI is the nation's premier networking and professional development community for senior leaders in higher education public relations. Membership information is available on the PRSA website. Now, on to the outline for today's discussion. I will ask the panelists questions during the first half of the Hangout, and they'll take turns sharing their thoughts. For the second half of our program, I'll ask the questions you provide. You can submit your questions in the Hangout or on our Google Plus page. You can also tweet them using hashtag CHE Hangout. That's hashtag CHI Hangout. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists. You can read their full bios on the CHI Facebook page. Lisa Rudgers is the Vice President for Global Communications and Strategic Initiatives at the University of Michigan. Michael Warden is the Vice President of Institute Communications at Georgia Institute of Technology. Michael is also a member of the CHI Executive Committee and the immediate past chair. We had a third panelist that was scheduled from the United Kingdom, but she couldn't attend today because of a communications crisis on her campus. Go figure. For those watching, I'd like to provide context for today's discussion. Several universities are embarking on new projects and activities that engage those institutions outside their national boundaries. These universities are including transnational relations among their core strategic interests and concerns when considering their future path for success. The motivation for these universities is multiple and complex, with few possessing a clear idea of best practices and specifics, especially when it comes to managing their global brands. Our panelists have the unique perspective of advising their presidents and institutional leaders on how to navigate this international environment. Which leads me to my first question. For institutions that have a global focus, what do you recognize are the most significant strategic communications challenges? And Lisa, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Dana. Thank you very much for having me. Significant communications challenges to do this globally. I think perhaps there are three as I think of it. The first is the fundamental challenge of reaching stakeholders who are thousands of miles and multiple time zones away with content that is relevant and timely, interesting, and engaging. So that's really, that's fundamental to the challenges that we have in going into this kind of work. The second, perhaps more nuanced, is the sense that we need to understand well how folks around the globe consume content and how they're using social media platforms today. And the third, I know I think about this a lot, and I'm sure many of my colleagues do. How do we staff that kind of initiative, those kinds of initiatives? We all have tremendous aspirations around this today. We have, at the University of Michigan, 25,000 alumni who live around the world, and the staffing to make all of those aspirations real and to be effective in communicating globally, well, perhaps that's the biggest challenge of all right now.
Michael.
Well, I hear a lot of the same challenges in what Lisa just outlined right there. I'll share some additional ones that we've experienced here at Georgia Tech. And in fact, quite recently, both our president and our provost and several members of our executive leadership team, as a part of our own global strategy, have engaged in and committed significant amounts of their time to go overseas where we have existing relationships and where we have quite a few existing alumni networks and where we draw a significant number of our prospective students and interest in coming to Georgia Tech. And in fact, in April, they spent about a week touring Asia, including China, Singapore, and South Korea. And then literally just 2 weeks ago, got back from a week stint in Europe, where we opened a research facility at our campus in Metz. And as you can imagine, with a significant research facility that is actually funded entirely by the French government, on our campus in Metz, we had a grand opening and press conference and all the associated things that you have with those sort of big building openings. And I'm gonna skip forward and tell you that based on that experience, before I forget this, if you want to remember something in doing what all of us are very accustomed to doing here in the United States, and if one thing to never forget when you're doing it in a foreign country, when you get all those clips, be sure to pay for a translation, because we got mountains of clippings from both the China trip and the Europe trip, all of them in language. And they look very nice on the screen, but I don't know about you, but my Korean's a little rusty. My French has not been practiced since high school, and so they're a little more difficult. So you have to go that extra step in terms of and that's the one thing we forgot to do. We forgot to include in our contract for the clips a translation, so that the people we shared them with would be able to read them. But some things that, just based on that recent experience, that it's really important to remind people of. The media in the world is not like media in the United States. It is a fundamentally different enterprise, and it's different almost country to country, certainly region to region. The media practices and the media culture are very, very different overseas, particularly in Asia. And we need to remember that, because I think we make certain value judgments as professionals based on our primarily U.S.-centric experience with the media. Very different enterprises overseas. The second thing is that the culture matters, and if you don't understand a local culture, you can actually inadvertently say and do things that may be perceived as either threatening or insulting to the locals. And you want to keep that in mind. So it's very, very important to make sure that our traveling party was very, very well briefed by people sensitive to those kinds of things in those countries that they were visiting. That's a lot of pre-work that you need to do to make them sensitive to the fact that they're communicating in an entirely different fashion. And then for those that are media training your principals that are going to be interviewed by in-country press, it's important for them to understand that it's going to be a very awkward situation, because typically they're going to have simultaneous translation of both the questions that are being asked and their answers. So that's a very awkward thing for someone who's talking and is used to being interviewed, to have to pause at very unnatural moments to allow the translator to be able to keep up with them, to the reporters that are in the room. It's a very unnatural, and it's something that in your media training you need to take into account. And then finally, the language. You need to remember that the language differences, and you have to make allowances for that. So for both the China trip and the Europe trip, what we did is we're fortunate that we have a actual full-time Georgia Tech employee. They're primarily fundraising, but they are in country in China. We have one in France. No, I believe he actually lives in Belgium. And then we were able to use them. They're both fluent in the languages, but we contracted with a local PR agency, both in France and in China, to support our media outreach and to support the media interviews that we conducted in conjunction with the other visits. It's certainly important to have an in-country presence there. I don't know, Lisa, I know that your title is global senior VP, and that entails a lot of things. I don't know if that means you have a global staff that you have. We certainly don't have a global staff. We have to depend on in-country public relations expertise and working very closely with them. We're still learning on that, by the way, and it's a fairly recent and not inexpensive endeavor to reach out and get that kind of expertise that really your leaders need when they're visiting those countries. So those would be three things that I would point out.
Yeah, and Michael, you started to hit on some of the challenges in terms of how you responded. So I'm going to direct that to Lisa. Lisa, how have you responded to the challenge associated with going global?
Sure. So I'll start with Michael's lead-in about those who we have dedicated to this, because I think that's really important. So we're very fortunate at the University of Michigan to have a global team of communicators that are part of our staff. We used some openings as they became available and directed them, prioritized those openings to folks who have a global sensibility and help us with our global communications. That is led by Bill Foreman, who was with the Associated Press all over the world for many years and in Asia for 12 years, a Mandarin speaker. So Bill has helped us immensely, enormously in understanding the media culture as Michael has described it, but also introducing us to social media platforms that are non-American based. So one of the ways in which we have delivered our own news and try to make a direct connection with our stakeholders in Asia especially is through our account on Weibo, and which is the Chinese Twitter, microblog Twitter, and that's been a powerful opportunity for us. Bill drove the development of that program. We post in Mandarin, thanks to him, and some of our other staff. We post in Mandarin 2 or 3 times a day. And we have almost 15,000 followers on Weibo right now. In fact, we had a 100%, 105% growth in followers in 2013 and 10% just in the first quarter of 2014. So for us, Weibo has been a very important connection point. We also, through our global team, translate into several languages. So, and we did that in conjunction and in support of the presidential delegations here at the University of Michigan. The president has spent the last 12 years, almost her whole tenure, going from taking university delegations of researchers in country, in China twice, Africa, Brazil, and India most recently. And as those trips emerged and the research opportunities were built among those countries with the university researchers, we supported that with in-language translation. And like Michael, we did hire some on-the-ground local PR folks to help us during those delegation trips, but also help us with media connections overall. But that's managed through our global communications team. We also have a Hindi speaker and a woman in university communications in another unit of the university is a Portuguese speaker, and we have a Spanish speaker as well. So we really try our best to internally, in-house, have a lot of cultural sensibility, do a lot of in-language, in-country translation, and you can find some of that. I'll point you to a couple of resources, but the most important one probably is our global website where we archive and provide information for journalists and for the general public in all of those languages. It's global.umich.edu. And another piece of that from the U.S. side is our Twitter account at Global Michigan. So we try to keep a lot of sensitivity around that, and we've prioritized it institutionally.
Michael, did you want to hit on any other challenges? I know you started. Were there other things that you thought our users or those who are viewing would want to know or hear?
Well, first of all, I want to say, and thank you, Lisa. Actually, you have just painted a picture of what I would like to grow our own capacity here at Georgia Tech to. And one of the biggest advantages I think that we have and that we ought to take more advantage of is that we do have leaders out there in higher ed space like Michigan who are out there and really kind of leading the way that all of us should be looking towards in terms of our global communication responsibilities. It's you know, and you've got to think in those ways, and then I, as a leader, have to incorporate that in my own thinking as I am preparing budgets and strategies to present to the executive leadership team. So, for example, you know, I work off of a strategic plan that we developed a little over 2 years ago when I first got here that mirrors our Institute's strategic plan. And the advantage that we have with the Institute's strategic plan is it's a 25-year plan, so it's a pretty long horizon. And certainly international is one of those priorities in that 25-year plan. So my strategies that I work from here align with the Institute's strategic plan. And so because international and an emphasis on international strategy is one of those strategies in the strategic plan, it's easier for me to engage in that conversation at the leadership level because it is consistent with one of the strategies of the Institute. So my own group will have actually probably later this year, the 9th strategy of our strategic priorities is collaborating with the Vice Provost for International Initiatives to develop a communication plan to support our international strategy. We've published a plan, so we have a vision for what we want to do, not only at the Institute level, but at the specific strategy level of international. And in fact, it's called, this is typical science and technology focused university, it's GTGPS. We love acronyms here. It's the Georgia Tech Global Positioning Strategy. And it lays out very nicely, actually, what our strategy is. And that will serve as sort of the vision for the kinds of communication support that we're going to need. What I envision in that, I'm already talking about in budget meetings and in conversations that I have with the president and the executive leadership team. I'm already preparing them for what I know will have to be a significant investment or redirecting of resources, just as Lisa did, that will be focused on those strategic priorities. So I'm going to have to make an ask at some point and then redirect some of my own internal resources to do precisely what Lisa has done already. And I think that that's really the job of the VP or the AVP or whoever's in charge and who's the executive. You've got to be focused on exactly what leadership is focused on. What you do has to resonate with their strategic goals and their business plan that they have going forward. Because if it doesn't, you're just, you're on the periphery of those conversations. So certainly, I will be coming forward with a plan that will include both staff, resources, and then I think learning from my peers and then learning from my own experience. Prior to getting into higher education, I spent 22 years in the Air Force and did international public relations all over the world. The only difference was that we were armed at that time, and we're much more peaceful in higher ed.
That's good to hear.
And but I've had some background and experience and recognize that that it is actually it's a team effort, and you've got to work as a team. And by that I mean, with the U.S. presence in countries, you've got to work very closely with embassies, and with the State Department staff, you've got to work with intergovernmental agencies, and then of course you work institution to institution. And so I've got to keep in mind that proposal needs to keep all of that in mind as we focus our own resources. It's a very different world out there, and I learn a lot in sessions from people like Lisa, who is out there blazing these kinds of trails. Stanford is another, Duke is another institution that is very, very active internationally. And don't forget your peers. Learn from your peers. And that's precisely why we're doing something like this Google Hangout, and that's so everybody has the opportunity to hear from people who are playing in this space now, making mistakes, doing some things right, and then planning on trying to press that envelope and use that experience to build even better programs.
Dana, I'd love to second first of all, thank Michael for those are very gracious comments. I think we're all learning, And it is such a brand new world for us to understand how to not just do this, but do it well and do it consistently. And I would really want to second what Michael is saying about matching the institutional priorities. That, for me, is the most important piece of this. And the university's global activity for 100 years has been remarkably strong. I mean, it is in the DNA of the University of Michigan. We have hundreds of research projects and international student engagements across the world, and our communications needs to match that, needs to support that activity, the scholarly activity, the educational activity, and that's how we create our plans as well. And I think that's a very sort of a basic, fundamental, but critically important point.
So quickly, I just want to say to both of you and to our audience, if you see me look off or look around the room, what I'm looking for is that we have individuals who are sending in questions, and so when I look over, that's what I'm looking at. And just a reminder to our audience, if you want to submit a question, you can do so in our Hangout, on our Google Plus page, or by tweeting them using hashtag CHE Hangout. My next question is this. For communicators, for senior communicators who want to help their institution succeed in this global environment, what do you recommend they do or avoid doing? And I'll start with Lisa.
Well, one thing we've learned in, we started this, we've taken major leaps in the last 3 years, but we actually started this, our foray into international communications, knit into the whole of our portfolio about a decade ago when we started a Spanish language portal, en Español, for our gateway, our university's web presence. And that was just a fascinating learning experience for us to understand through that. So we started translation at that time, and we started looking across the university at what content would be most relevant for Spanish-speaking audiences around the world, both from a research perspective and admissions perspective. And we built en Español. It grew very quickly. With that, we built a database of Spanish language and English language media reporters that were working with Spanish language audiences. And so we built this database of reporters that with whom we were talking all the time about the content. And that experience helped us understand just how dedicated you have to be to the work if you are going to plan it well in advance and make sure when you go live you're ready to commit to what it takes for the regular time of translation and connecting with media and doing all the follow-through and now social media. So we saw first with the pilot of En Español and then what we've built since then that it is just a tremendous time commitment and with knowledgeable folk. So you need to be prepared for that, and you can't do it in and out, with less than sort of total dedication. You can build on it over time. I mean, En Español was really the gist of our activity for quite a few years, and so we learned from that before we expanded into other languages and more social media activity, which grew up during that time. But you got to be ready to put the time in and put the effort in and put the resources in, and that's a long-term strategic planning exercise.
Michael.
Whoa. There are, I think, lots of things to think about. And again, some of this, we have made a concerted effort to reach out to our peers who've had a lot of experience in doing this. Michigan, Duke, and Stanford in particular being some, just because we have good personal relationships. And then plus it's very easy to drive to Duke from Atlanta. So we learn a lot from our peers, but there's something I would encourage everybody to think about, and that is that business and industry and actually public relations agencies themselves have been very involved in working with and for international clients and developing these kinds of practices. And I have the advantage of being here in Atlanta, of having many of the major public relations agencies that actually have offices here in Atlanta. And what I've been able to do is actually go out to lunch and drinks with the managing director of Ogilvy Mather, for example. That's literally, I can see out my window here. And with Edelman, are two of the bigger ones that are here in Atlanta, and really just pick their brains. And they're very generous with their time in terms of sharing their experiences and some of the pluses and minuses of trying to engage in international public relations. So don't overlook the professional network that includes people outside of higher education. Businesses have been doing international, have been engaged internationally for much, much longer, I think, than higher ed has, and certainly have dedicated more resources to the subject. So I use, actually, for example, the local Public Relations Society of America chapter here in Atlanta, because it has membership that includes the PR agencies, a lot of colleges and universities here in Atlanta that attend that. And then we have several corporations that are headquartered here in Atlanta, including, for example, UPS, Delta Airlines, Coca-Cola. And all of those are resources that we can leverage, and particularly Coca-Cola, that's literally across the street from us here. They're very generous with their time, and what we do is it's not just me liaisoning with them. I like to bring speakers to speak to both my staff and the entire campus in terms of what it's like to conduct public relations internationally. CARE International is also headquartered here, and that's a philanthropy. You remember the CARE packages that you send to all over the world, usually where there's war and famine. We brought the media relations staff in from CARE to do a presentation to us about how they do media relations in the most desolate regions of Africa when they go over there. And they shared some wonderful, wonderful experiences about how you could do it yourself, some of the things that you need to think about, including how many clothes to pack, and some free resources that they found that were available that they could use to transfer high quality data back to the home office here in Atlanta. So you think beyond. Certainly use your peers, use those in higher education, like Lisa, like Georgia Tech, like Stanford, and others that are engaged in this space at some degree or another. But don't overlook the professional network that includes the PR agencies and the businesses and industries that are already out there. I find them to be a wonderful resource, and we can learn a lot from them, and do learn a lot from them, and they're very generous with their time and their counsel.
Oh, I couldn't agree with that more. And it is so true that the corporate community has been engaged in this space in such a savvy way. So, and we have learned so much, and from our alumni also, who in many ways helped drive us and motivate us to do more overseas. Many of them coming, seeing in their own corporate experience how important that is to be engaged.
So we're beginning to receive questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with one. What do you believe? Wait, I'm going to come back to that one. What skills do you look for when hiring for your global outreach teams? And I'm going to flip the script. Michael, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've not yet begun hiring staff dedicated to sort of global outreach, but I will tell you the kinds of things that I would look for. I would look for experience. First of all, the first thing I'm going to look for is writing. They've got to be able to write. They've got to be good with words, and to the extent that they have experience in the news industry, I think that that's a great resource to bring people in. I find that certainly people who have been working journalists at some point in their life, or who have trained and written journalistically, make great members of the staff, and I think help us tremendously. So Lisa, the hiring of someone who had worked in AP internationally and who speaks Mandarin would be fantastic. So I'm looking for international experience because I think if you haven't even lived internationally, it's a little hard for you, I think, to apply your skills in the context of a different culture, different media environment, different language. I would like to be able to hire some language proficiency onto the staff eventually. Right now, though, what we're doing is we're depending on staff who do have multilingual capability. For example, our employee in Europe who speaks French, obviously speaks English, Belgian, he's and German. He's very fluent in all those languages. Our employee over in China is very fluent in several dialects, but also in Mandarin. And then we use actually PhD students here at Georgia Tech, but one because they're a little more reliable than undergraduates, to help us with some of the translation and cultural sensitivities that we have in taking our U.S. content and repurposing it for viewing by international audiences. And so I would say that those are the kinds of things that I would be looking for in terms of experience. And those are most important, I think, for the lead people that we would have working in the area of global communication.
I agree with all of that. I would add a couple of things. I mean, I have learned so much, and I believe our team has been so enriched by hiring globally diverse folks. So our Mandarin speaker actually was born in Kansas, but one of the members of our team is from India, another born in Chile, another born in China. So for us, that helps us to build in-house a kind of cultural sensitivity that we've all learned from, and very, very important to me. We reach across the campus as well, PhD students and others with global experience that we think can help shape and influence what we're doing. And I would add one more element that we have seen is really important in the content we're creating, and that is multimedia sensibility. So I just tweeted out this morning, for instance, a 2.5-minute video. It's a story of some of our students going to India to work in and learn from a community kitchen that has been operating for 400 years. With going with one of our faculty members, and it's just this wonderful story, beautifully told in 2.5 minutes of video. I can see how much more of that we need, and also Bill and I were talking the other day about graphics, creating graphics that help us tell stories no matter what language we're translating into. And so that multimedia sensibility and that graphic sensibility is something we'll be looking more and more for.
So for students who are, or staff who are in the junior role and they are hoping to build toward more senior level work, perhaps again they may be still studying, what types of skills do you think that they should acquire to bring them to that place? And I'll let whichever one of you wants to go first, go first.
Take a language, learn a language other than English. I mean, my two competencies are in English and Atlantan. And I wish now that when I was in school and still, I think, full of fire to learn more, and I now wish that I would have been a little more diligent in my study of languages instead of taking Italian solely because it didn't have a lab.
I am sad every day that I don't know another language. I try to impart that to my 15-year-old right now so that he is serious about his language study, because that is the future. Also, obviously, I couldn't agree with Michael Moore. It doesn't matter what language you're writing in, you need to write well. And I worry about that sometimes these days, especially as we drive toward the visual and we drive toward social media. We cannot forget that we need to write well. But that multimedia and social media capability and savvy familiarity is so important. We couldn't have done, and you know, for some of us, we are immigrants to social media, while others are more native to it. But whatever way you get there, your ability to understand not just U.S.-based platforms, but those platforms that are emerging around the world, they're an instant, very timely, very directly connecting way to reach your stakeholders. And it's an evocative, emotional kind of connection often that before social media, we just didn't have the opportunity to you know, establish that, especially a long way away.
You know, there's this push to go global, and I think from a fundamental perspective, I think it may be helpful for our audience to understand why that's important. I mean, we know that the world is, at one point there was this perspective that the world was flat, and we know it's not flat, but now it's starting to feel flat again because of this international and global reach. But my question is, why? Why now? Why today? Why is this important?
You want to start, Michael?
Sure. Actually, for Georgia Tech, and this is not true of all universities, but Georgia Tech has been globally engaged really since about the 1980s. Actually, as a part of both a U.S. government and a Chinese government initiative, we entered into joint venture agreements with China to help develop their high-tech manufacturing capability. Manufacturing and logistics and technology being core strengths of Georgia Tech. We were a natural partner in that, and at that particular time, the United States government was very interested in trying to develop some more inroads into China for U.S. technology, for U.S. Studies, scholars, and businesses to get into China. So we were very much at a leading edge in that, and frequently are, particularly in technology, we are one of those institutions that are looked to as being sort of a leader that foreign governments and certainly higher education systems and universities across the world come to us to really kind of pick our brain and see if they can develop relationships with us, either for joint degree programs, for fellowships, for postdocs, and then also some agreements. We have an agreement with Panama that established a logistics center down there that draws on our logistics faculty and our logistics research to help inform both the Panamanian government and then also the redevelopment that's going on with the Panama Canal currently. And they're working with us, and we have a Georgia Tech branded presence in Panama. And I think that in higher education, the world has been flat much longer than it has been in many other enterprises. Our faculty are engaged with their counterparts all over the world. It's the nature of the enterprise of higher education, and particularly in research. And I think it's just very natural that we follow that sort of academic experience that is already in place on our campuses to broaden our reach beyond just the academic outreach and collaborations with our partners across the world.
I think we're catching up with communicators. You know, at the University of Michigan, President Angel in the 1880s, right, was establishing a relationship with China. We have a long-standing partnership with Shanghai Jiaotong University in China and around engineering, and you know, that's going strong a decade later, and our communications is in my view just now catching up. I took a trip to China in 2011, and I'm on the 88th floor of a building in Shanghai looking out over the sort of vastness of it, and it struck me that a global brand certainly can't be global and today or going forward without recognizing and being from a communications perspective, being engaged and stopping the silly parochial nature that we seem to have among the communicators in higher education, among, not our researchers. Michael's right. I mean, I think it is 600 and counting programs right now, either research or educational, that the University of Michigan faculty members and students have across the world. And we just have to catch up with that.
I've heard China come up a few times, and we have a question regarding China. What are the most effective channels to connect with the university and postgraduate community in China? And I'll repeat that. What are the most effective channels, communications channels, to connect with the university and postgraduate community in China?
Yeah, so we've seen a couple of things. TV is fantastic. So if there is an opportunity for administrators, the president, researchers, folks from your university to be involved in television interviews in China, it has tremendous reach, and we hear about it. I'll tell you a story. A few years ago, President Coleman, I think she was on her second trip to China, and she was interviewed by Chinese television. I still hear about that interview from alumni and students who, with whom I interact, and it just is astonishing to me, the reach that television has there, and the memorability of it. As I said, Weibo, the Chinese version of Twitter, the microblog, has been very successful for us in keeping connected and in help from notifying folks about events that are happening in China to bringing back images of the campus to our alumni in China. So a couple of examples of that. We just did a Pan-Asian reunion, Alumni Association reunion in Hong Kong. It was the largest attendance ever for one of those events for the University of Michigan in Asia. And we think in great measure that is because of the connectivity that social media has allowed us to have with our stakeholders there, and begin to knit everyone together there and keep a closer connection with the university than we've had the chance to before. And I have seen many examples of alumni who on Weibo will see pictures of campus, the cube, for those of you who know the University of Michigan, or recently I saw one with cupcakes with a block M on it, and it just fun, evocative pictures, but those images travel on social media and are just a terrific way to keep people connected. We're starting right now a pilot with WeChat, which is a hot new social media channel in China. It is mobile only, and the growth of mobile, you've probably seen the statistics, the use of mobile across the world is just huge. And so we have 255 followers on right now. We're brand new to it, but we'll see how the exploration of new channels like that work as well.
Michael?
Well, I think that for us the jury is still out, because in terms of our physically working within country media has been a relatively recent phenomenon, just the last couple of years. So we're, like I say, my media team is still kind of trying to figure which of those are more productive for us, particularly with our orientation and our focus being science and technology. Which ones work for us and which ones don't. We're in fact starting in this year, in this fiscal year, for us, an international social media initiative that includes establishing a presence in China, again using primarily student staff here who are fluent in Mandarin, to establish a China presence and China approved, that's the key thing, the China approved Twitter, so Weibo, as Lisa has mentioned, and then the name escapes me right now, but there's their Facebook equivalent. If your social media folks, if you talk to them much about where your traffic is coming from, you'll find that there are huge voids in terms of any returns from China and certainly North Korea on any of your analytics that you get from your current social media channels like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and that's because of the governmental restrictions that they have on those media, restricting the population there. There are ways to get around that. It's very cumbersome, but that's why you get basically no data on it. So that's why it's critical for you to go and use the media that is approved in country, and that you do it in language. And I don't want to say it's no cost. It is some cost. We're going to have to pay graduate students to do the translations. We're going to have to spend time supervising them and getting information to them to use. But it's a great way to get out there and get your name and your activity, and you'll be surprised at how quickly that will grow in country and how that will be very much appreciated. We established a very embryonic presence in advance of the President and Provost's visit to China, just to let them know of events, and it very quickly picked up in terms of followers just within a matter of a couple of weeks. So I would say, name recognition is very, very important. Don't assume that the name of your institution is going to be very well known, because, and I hate to say this, but I think interest in U.S. institutions, particularly in Asia, is driven very much by international rankings. And so, parents who are looking to send their students here to the U.S. are really looking for the bang for the buck, because it's very expensive enterprise for them to send a child to the U.S. to study. And so these are generally well-to-do groups, and they're looking for the best bang for the buck, so they're looking for the name recognition. And if you're not a University of Michigan or a Stanford or a Harvard, you got to get your name out there and have people understand and know who you are. And I think social media is probably the lowest barrier to getting the word out about your institution without a tremendous investment. So go play out in that space and learn about it. And there are many institutions like Michigan, soon Georgia Tech, and Duke. In fact, we recently sent our social media folks up to visit with their counterparts at Duke in terms of their presence on Chinese social media, to get some best practices from them and learn from them. So maybe we'll have one. Maybe we should have a hangout in the future about best social media practices in China.
Dana, I would add one thing as I'm thinking about it, and as Michael was talking about media relations. Yeah. I don't have the growth statistics, but I want to look into this. But in the last 3 years, we've done a great deal more translation of our news content, our research stories, some of our university activity stories in country languages. So we've done Portuguese, Hindi, Spanish, which we've been doing for quite some time, and Mandarin. Not just for social media content, but we have translated our press releases, provided some multimedia with those, and we're seeing just a tremendous news placement increase over the last couple of years. Because of that, I assume it is because of that language translation. So Bill just gave me a quarterly report for the first quarter of 2014, and there were, the University of Michigan had 12,000 media mentions outside the United States in the first quarter of 2014. I attribute that, I guess it's anecdotal in that I haven't tracked all the numbers specifically from before translation, but I attribute that to the increased translation that we do now of all of our news content, and the work that we're doing overseas in establishing media relations contacts. In India, we've done quite a bit of this in advance of and after President Coleman's trip there in November. And we're just seeing this huge influx of stories about the university, often in Hindi language newspapers. So that effort that we're expending now to translate, I think, is paying great dividends in our visibility in news media around the world.
Lisa, this is Michael. Do you do those translations of your news releases in-house, or do you use an outside service for that?
We mostly do it in-house. We use a little bit of outside service for some of the Spanish language, I believe, but we're primarily doing it in-house.
Okay. The reason I asked that question, and not everybody may know this, but again, there's a price of entry for everything, but some of the news distribution services, I know PR Newswire, for example, does offer an international package that includes translation. So if you had strategic and targeted reasons to get information to a particular part of the world and don't have those in-house resources, some of the news distribution providers actually do provide that as an additional cost service.
So I'm looking at our questions online. I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions. And so 2 words, censorship is the one word, and the other is culture. So how do those impact our ability to, or your ability to move into that global space? Are there countries that you're staying clear of, or is it somehow impacting the work such that you're not able to move into certain areas? Again, this is specific to culture and to the culture of those countries, and also to the other word I just said.
I'll start with that because we had a lot of conversation about it related to launching Weibo, and our guiding principle is this: we stand by the principles of academic freedom and freedom of expression. If our research work that we're communicating about is valuable research work, such that we're communicating about it, we communicate about it. And it goes across platforms. We've been anxious on a couple of occasions about what that might mean, but it has so far so good. And I think that it is very important, that as we think about this work, obviously we need to be quite culturally sensitive in understanding the sensitivities country to country, and but we also understand that we're part of an academic community here that values academic freedom most of all.
And I would say, to add to that, I think it's less a restriction on us than it ends up being a restriction on the audiences. And we're not going to know frequently when something gets blocked. I'd have to say our experience thus far has not been that it's a problem for us, because most of what we communicate is science and technology related, and is not ideological in any way. I think that, again, you're not going to know a lot about it, but our counterparts right across the city here in Atlanta have had that issue with China. The Emory University has a very close relationship with the Dalai Lama, and found that during a visit of the Dalai Lama here to the U.S. and to the Emory campus, that the Emory website was blocked by the Chinese government for all audiences in China. Again, I don't think that changes anything that Emory does. It just affects the Chinese audience that the government is interceding in, and it's like I say, I don't think it changes much of what we do. We certainly don't engage in self-censorship.
My final question, how do you deal with the tension between national and global perspectives? So there are the interests of the country that we live in, but then there's also the global perspectives. How have you addressed those issues?
Well, it's interesting as a public university, right? The sense of our priority and commitment to the state, our priority and commitment to the country, our priority and commitment to a global sensibility. So we really look at it on 3 levels, and I believe that those are complementary ideas and complementary priorities. When we have a global reputation and global activity, it brings activity back to the state, and it makes the country more competitive, and that's how we talk about it and think about it. I think it is hard sometimes for a public university that needs to express the importance of being rooted in its home state. and partners with the taxpayers of that state who have built this university over time. At the same time, and for 100 years, 150 years, so been so globally active. So it is a balance. I think it's a balancing of message, it's a balancing of attention, and it's the understanding of the strategic benefit to all for that global sensibility.
As a public institution, I know exactly what Lisa is talking about. In terms of what we do is we always try, certainly in the president's speeches and any press releases that we have, usually through attributed quotes, we try to anchor anything that we do internationally in advantage that it brings to both Georgia, the southeastern U.S., and to Atlanta economically by the fact that we are attracting both people, visitors, and research dollars to this region, and that for the most part end up getting spent locally. Like I say, we just opened a research facility at our Metz campus that was entirely funded by the French government. But in that press conference, and then here when we talked to the local media before we went over to dedicate the facility, we emphasized the fact that this is actually going to be a portal to Atlanta and to the U.S. and to Georgia Tech for the research that will be going on in this government-funded facility in France that costs the Georgia taxpayer not a single penny. So you got to keep all of your audiences in mind. That was not a bullet point that we used in the press conference in France, though.
Lisa, final comments.
It has been to our tremendous benefit, I think, as communicators at the University of Michigan to get engaged globally. I can't say enough about the perspective it has given all of us, and I'm looking very forward to working, if the folks who are across our campus who might be tuning into this, there is much we can do collaboratively with the schools and colleges across our campus. That's our next step in some ways, to work as much as we can with deans, with faculty members. We just launched a service called Mobile Global to help to partner with schools and colleges so that when there are delegations going over or really interesting research projects, we get in on the ground floor so that we can help get the right kinds of images that help tell that story and just encourage more communication around it. So it is, it's a big old world out there, and we can't afford to be parochial in it anymore.
Michael.
I would say the same thing. Certainly international is becoming increasingly important to the U.S., to higher education in general, and certainly to our states, I think, as they see the value proposition that is presented by particularly large institutions that are engaged in large research collaboratives across the world. And then, quite frankly, as a research university, we're really looking at those partnerships with international business and industry as being a source of funds that will fund the research enterprise here as the U.S. sort of shrinks its investment of federal dollars in that. So, again, we've got to be adaptive and responsive, and as communicators, we need to be able to quickly adapt and quickly apply our expertise in areas that are important to our institution strategically. Otherwise, if we don't do that and we don't adapt, I think we'll find ourselves being given less and less resources to do our jobs.
Michael, any final comments on behalf of the executive committee?
Well, I just stepped off as chair of the Counselors to Higher Ed, which I've been the chair of for 2 years, and then on the executive committee now for almost a dozen years, almost the entire time I've been in higher ed. It's been a great experience for me, a great learning experience for me. I get the privilege of working with people like Dana and Lisa and my friends from higher education all across the world. You'll find that despite the size of our respective enterprises, we are more alike than we are dissimilar. Our challenges sound very familiar to one another in these small groups that we get in. And I hope that we have the opportunity through things like Google Hangouts, and thank you, Dana, for this innovation, and thank you, University of Michigan, for investing in the Google enterprise to be able to make things like this possible, to be able to kind of spread the experience that that we have and have no barriers to that, whether those barriers are travel dollars or budgets that are always under tight squeezes. This is a great way to, I think, spread that expertise. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today. You're, as always, just a gracious contributor to the profession, and we really appreciate you joining us and making your experience available to more and more people.
Oh, Michael, thank you. It's delightful. I'm really pleased to be involved in this, and it's great to hang out with you again.
Good to see you as well. And thanks, Dana.
Oh, no
yeah,
problem.
Thank you, Dana.
And we want to thank everyone for attending and participating today. And again, I want to especially thank Vice President Rudgers and Vice President Warden. We also want to thank those behind the scenes who helped make today's event possible: Brian Kors, Bryce Holden, Juliana Rosati, Michael Stork, Lindsay Steele, Danielle Sabo, Ryan Viss, and anyone else I forgot. Thank you. A recording of this Hangout will be available on the PRSA website. This concludes our broadcast. And on behalf of the Public Relations Society of America, Counselors to Higher Education section, we'll see you next time.